Hello, I'm Kirsty Duncan, the Member of Parliament for Etobicoke North and the former Minister of Sport for Canada. I'm also a lifelong participant in sport as an athlete, coach, judge, and volunteer. Today, I want to share with you what sport means to me, sport as I experienced it, and what is needed to make sport safer in Canada. For my family, sport was our happy place where our family bonded. My dad was good enough pitcher in his youth to be approached by 6 Major League Baseball teams, and my mom was a high school phys ed teacher. My brother and I were both high performance athletes, and as a family, we volunteered at numerous national and international meets. As a child and young adult, I was a gymnast who trained 4 to 5 hours a night, 6 nights a week. Later, I ran the Boston Marathon many times. I was a triathlete who competed in half Ironman races, and I've been a dance teacher for most of my adult life and have coached numerous sports. I've also been a sister and friend to women and men who competed at the national and international levels in artistic swimming, cycling, diving, hockey, swimming, speed skating, track and field, and weightlifting. What my friends and I learned as children was that every sport had its own way of doing things, its own culture, its own tolerance for risk, its own set of rules, both written and unwritten. But there were also common themes and red flags that appeared along the way. Everyone had stories then, and some of those stories are very sadly just coming to light now. We also learned there were dirty hidden secrets and an ugly, ugly underbelly in the pursuit of excellence and owning the podium. For decades, organizations, coaches, judges, and others failed to protect young people from abuse, discrimination, harassment, and assault. While I have not experienced the most horrific cases of abuse that other athletes have, I know what it is like to be weighed and shamed, to be instructed to eat laxatives, toilet paper, and water pills to make weight, to train through injury. By middle school, I pretended to eat breakfast every day. And by high school, I threw out each packed lunch for me. As a varsity gymnast, I ate only oranges during final exams and damaged the lining of my stomach. And I've battled disordered eating during my entire adult life. So I ask, where was the leadership to protect the health, safety, and well-being of athletes over many decades? In Canada, we have provincial and territorial education acts to protect youth. They dictate the level of responsibility that teachers and principals have when ensuring the safety of students. The details in these acts differ among jurisdictions. Generally, however, the level of responsibility is to act as positive role models and to act as that of a careful, kind, yet firm and prudent parent. They also have a duty of care to protect their students from all reasonable, foreseeable risks of injury or harm. Let me take a moment to remember and honor Indigenous children, thousands of whom did not come home from school. I also remember and honor their families who suffered terribly and were so tragically let down by Canada and some religious organizations. But because of Education Acts, children are meant to be protected during school hours and activities by principals and teachers who can be held liable if they fail to meet their duty of care obligations. What happened and continues to happen to those same children when the bell rings to end the school day? What duty of care has been and should be required of coaches, managers, trainers, judges, officials, and anyone else in the sports system to those children? When I was appointed Minister of Sport in the winter of 2018, I drew a line in the sand and said the days of hear no evil, see no evil were over in sport. My number one priority was safe sport and protecting the health, safety, and well-being of athletes and everyone in the sports system. I should never have had to say that emotional, physical, psychological, sexual, or verbal abuse have no place in sport, that no athlete should ever be belittled, humiliated, screamed at, sworn at, or worse. No child should ever be held underwater or yanked from the pool by their hair. And no young person should require years of therapy because of the damage done during their sporting career. But I had to say it, and I had to back it up with meaningful protections. Let me share a mix of history and sport as I experienced them. It's important for people to understand that the federal government only became involved in sport because large numbers of men were rejected for military service during the Second World War because they were deemed physically unfit. Once the government decided to get involved in sport, they were now in the business of looking after the health, safety, and welfare of young people. But that didn't happen. In my own life, the first significant sporting moment was watching the 1976 Montreal Olympics. While Canada had its largest medal haul since 1932, the media coverage focused on Canada's failure to bring home a gold medal. Here are just a few newspaper headlines. No gold for Canada. Failure to win gold. Canadian performances better than previous years, but remain disappointing. Canada gave bit performances. Wow, that's some show of support for youth who trained for years and years, hours on end to make the Olympics, and who proudly represented their country on home soil. Athletes are not chattel, and they need to know that sport leaders have their backs. Yet some of the most heartbreaking moments in Canadian television have been watching some poor athlete who trained for years and in the hardest moment of their young lives apologize to Canadians for failing. They owe us nothing. So why were they ever made to feel like they did? Following the Montreal Games, there was a palpable shift in Canadian sport. The focus changed to winning medals in international competitions, and particularly that elusive Olympic gold. That change reached all the way down to the club level. The message was clear to my friends and I at our gymnastics club. Sport leaders wanted winners, and the goal was now to go, quote, go national. That message was echoed across other sports. In our club, coaches from the old Eastern Bloc communist countries were either brought in or cycled through. They were tough. There was a lot of hitting, slapping by coaches to fix an athlete's technique, and a new, never-ending focus on being thin. By 1980, my friends and I were hearing more and more about roids. Steroids in the change rooms, around our high school, and on the street. They made you fast and strong and could even stunt your growth, an attractive feature in some sports. Here in Canada, some coaches and sport federations put the health, well-being, and safety of athletes well behind the pursuit of victory. Some athletes were even treated as cattle. That's not an exaggeration, because some, in fact, were injected with a veterinary product. Young people, in essence, became lab rats, as different types of drugs were injected to enhance performance. That, now and forever, is abuse. Athletes were started young and with a don't tell and deny mentality. Some were even made to feel helpful, important, at age 12 and 14, and part of the team by lending a hand to administer drugs by injecting them between the toes of other athletes. I call this grooming. Build the relationship, build trust, and make an emotional connection with a child or young person so that they could be convinced to get with the program. Abused, exploited, and manipulated. Doctors were brought in to make it all seem okay. Athletes were given compendia of pharmaceuticals, not your normal code of conduct document, and certainly not your usual training equipment and gear. What steroids were, what combinations to take, how to procure them, how to inject them, how to hide the injections between the toes, and how to make sure they were out of the body was not taught in school. The same was true for blood doping and urine substitution. What if there had been a duty of care in sport where there can be a substantial power differential and where coaches, doctors, and others in charge could have been held liable for their charges? I spoke earlier about different sports having different cultures. In many of the sports that contain an artistic component, there is a huge focus on aesthetics, how an athlete looks. Thin is good, but thinner is better. Unrealistic and unsafe weight goals are sometimes demanded, sometimes provoking athletes to do anything to make weight. No teacher ever called me fat in school, recommended that I lose weight, or even weighed me in front of the class. This happened in sport. In male-dominated sports, we often see toxic masculinity, crude, rude, dehumanizing women, and worse. We've read and heard the stories in the newspapers, online, and on television. As kids playing in the park, we heard the stories of junior hockey players skipping out of school, the underage use of alcohol and drugs away from the arena, and the bragging about, and please forgive me here, and I quote, how many puck bunnies one of the guys bagged on the weekend. Where were the adults in charge of the team? Where were the adults running the league? Where were the provincial and national associations demanding their members to abide by principles of common decency? There are people trying to make change, like Sheldon Kennedy, the modern-day Canadian hero whose bravery and courage has and continues to make a difference in the pursuit of safe sport. Sheldon was part of the 1988 World Junior Hockey Championship winning team and the 1989 Memorial Cup champions before playing 8 seasons in the National Hockey League. How we accomplished those things is nothing short of a miracle. In 1996, Sheldon approached the Calgary Police Department and revealed that during the entirety of his junior hockey career, he was repeatedly abused by his coach. In fact, he had been sexually assaulted hundreds of times. Sheldon's story should have been a wake-up call for the hockey community and for the entire Canadian sports system. Sadly and shockingly, it wasn't. Let me be clear, it's not just hockey, gymnastics, and a handful of other sports. Abuse cuts across sports. We have heard and read about these horrific stories in the media for decades. So how many decades, how many stories, how many athletes coming forward and sharing the pain they've endured does it take before the government does the right thing and calls an inquiry? Current approaches focused on symbolic compliance, avoiding legal liability, and protecting reputations and legacies do nothing to address the problem all of us face as participants in the Canadian sports system. Throwing more money at Band-Aid solutions and a half-hearted shuffling of the shares at the executive level of some sport organizations will not fix the systemic, decades-entrenched abuse. It's about the assaults, abuse, and harassment of athletes by coaches, trainers, and support staff. It's also about athletes who become predators and exploit their hero status by harming people who may be tangentially exposed to the sports system. And it's about athletes who abuse other athletes. It's time to get serious and launch a systematic inquiry that leaves no stone unturned, exposes the rot, and makes real recommendations with serious consequences for anyone not on board. I've spent my life protecting children, so it's disappointing when past and current sport leaders say they understand the need to ask questions and find solutions, but proactively argue against an independent inquiry. As someone who has seen firsthand the harm caused by a broken system, I have a very clear position. We will not get to where we need to be without a national public inquiry across sport to probe the darkest reaches of the sports system. For the sake of athletes already affected by the despicable actions of others in positions of power, and for the next generation of people around sport, we need an inquiry and we need to act now.